Chapter 23 Wall Street Becomes Famous. The new New York, the free American New York, already had two great days, November 25th, 1783, when the British had evacuated the city, and June 23rd, 1788, when the mighty Federalist procession had proclaimed New York's support for the Constitution. Now it was about to have a third, a significant and joyous day, for a new government was preparing to take its place among the powers of the world, and the beloved Washington was on his way here to be inaugurated as its first president. Great were the preparations. Samuel Osgood's fine house at No. 3 Cherry Street, already used by the presidents of Congress, was redecorated for the executive mansion, and by April, a barge about 50 feet long had been constructed for the trip from Elizabethtown to Murray's Wharf at the foot of Wall Street, where carpeted stairs awaited the presidential landing. On April 23rd, all was aflutter. Balconies, housetops, docks, and all the little boats in the harbor were crowded by the eager multitude. As the canopied barge came into view around Staten Island, a salute of 13 guns boomed from the battery. Flags were run to every mast-top, and the waving hats of the crowd that cheered along the shore looked like a field of grain swayed by the wind. 13 white-clad pilots rowed the barge, with Commodore James Nicholson as commander and Captain Thomas Randall serving as coxswain. While at the landing place, a military escort surrounded the coach provided for General Washington's further progress. He chose, however, to walk through the flag-hung, crowded streets to his new home. The week that followed was an exciting one indeed. What with gay illumination in every house, formal dinners and a ball or two keeping the city awake by night, a state election stirring all the rabid politicians on Tuesday, and the presidential inauguration to thrill the populace on Thursday, Friday must have found everyone nearly exhausted. With foreign ambassadors and curious visitors thronging the streets, all the new produce markets and little dry goods shops and bookstores opening up in Hanover Square and along Pearl Street probably did a thriving business during those days. Bright and early on the morning of April 30th, the inauguration ceremonies began with services in all the churches. At 12, a stately procession took its way to Cherry Street, that Washington, soberly dressed in brown homespun, might be escorted with all dignity to Federal Hall. Over its broad balcony, a striped awning had been hung, and here the oath of office was administered by Chancellor Livingston, while Wall Street looked on, hushed to silence. As soon as Washington had repeated the oath and kissed the Bible, Livingston waved his hat to the people on the street and exclaimed, "Long live George Washington, President of the United States." 3 chairs were given, while Washington bowed and then re-entered the hall. The statue of Washington that adorns the steps of the Sub-Treasury building, erected on the site of the old Federal Hall, commemorates this greatest moment in Wall Street's singular history. At the conclusion of the ceremony, a flag raised above the cupola of the hall gave the signal for a salute from the battery. Bells pealed, and the people everywhere gave vent to their emotions in prolonged shouting. From Federal Hall, the presidential party walked to the services in St. Paul's Chapel, for Trinity was still in the process of rebuilding, and the remainder of the day was given over to rejoicing. In this dramatic way did the wooded Mannahatten of Hudson, the wilderness trading post of Christiansen and Block, the Dutch New Amsterdam of Peter Stuyvesant, the English New York of Lovelace, the New Orange of Anthony Colvey, the New York of Sloughter and his successors, the home of Captain Kidd, and the battlefield of Washington and Howe became the first seat of government of the new nation. To some of the travelers who visited New York during the next 10 months, it seemed as if the city had no other object than gaiety. The 300 or so who made up its social register, the Jays and Knoxes, the Roosevelts and Izzards, the Livingstons and Ludlows, all the old aristocratic Dutch, Huguenot, and English families who had intermarried since the town was young, did have a good time. And they were rather extravagant, too, with their swords and powdered wigs, their satin waistcoats, knee buckles, and silk stockings. The New York ladies of fashion, with their high pomaded headdresses and flaring hoops, demanded and enjoyed luxuries that equaled any to be found in the capitals of Europe. The President and Mrs. Washington held formal levees twice each week, at which full dress was worn. The canary-colored presidential coach, adorned with cupids holding garlands of flowers, and drawn by 6 white horses stepping high on their painted hoofs, became an accustomed sight on the 14 miles round. This was the fashionable afternoon drive of the period. The route led up to the old Boston Post Road on the line of 3rd Avenue, crossed Murray Hill, where Lexington Avenue now stretches, proceeded west through McGowan's Pass to Bloomingdale, and turned back to follow the Hudson River through Greenwich Village and across Lispenard Meadows or through Love Lane, 21st Street, into Broadway. Into the Macomb House at number 39 Broadway, Washington moved on his birthday in 1790 with his family, his servants, and secretaries. Old, dilapidated Fort George at the foot of Broadway was torn down, and a government mansion was nearly completed on its site when Congress decided to make Philadelphia the nation's capital instead of New York. New York hesitated to cede jurisdiction over the 10 square miles of territory that Congress demanded, and quite positively refused to give up its port taxes to the support of a resident federal government. Once again, commerce decided the destiny of her favorite city.